President Zelensky has sacked Ukrainian armed forces top commander. Just why did he choose to do so? And why are some of his own commanders in open rebellion against him? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about this story. So this is a really interesting turn of events. Zelensky dismisses a lieutenant general accused by soldiers of heavy losses. And indeed, Zelensky has dismissed Yuri Sadol, the commander of the joint forces of the Ukrainian armed forces. This is a really high-ranking position that you have Syrskyi on top, who's functioning as the Secretary of Defense. This is like a rough analogy. But then you also have somebody who's in charge of all the joint military forces. That would be sort of like the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, or maybe like a combatant command commander. And so this is someone with a lot of direction over the entire fighting of the war. And so this individual was dismissed and replaced by another brigadier general, Andrei Natov. What's interesting is that there have been a number of criticisms levied against him, including by Lieutenant Colonel Bohdan Krovech, one of Azov Brigade's top officers, formally filing a complaint to the State Bureau of Investigation and also publicly saying why he chose to do so without naming the general explicitly. Right? But the more interesting part, Sadol has been in charge since February, right? So a pretty short 4-month stint. And as we've talked about, over that 4 months, we've seen Ukraine pivot to what looks like a more elastic defense, where they're willing to yield territory to the Russians in order to inflict casualties. And I operated on the assumption that that tactic was about preserving Ukrainian manpower. But it appears that based on the casualty numbers, that in a lot of cases, Ukrainians are actually taking more casualties. It's interesting that this happened this firing happened so quickly, because again, Sadol basically was criticized by Colonel Krovech, and then almost within 48 hours, he was sacked. So I kind of suspect that this is a reflection of something that Zelensky already wanted to do and had now finally been given the pretext to do so. But what's also interesting is that you can see the same story covered by Radio Free Europe, recognizes that his criticisms didn't just come from the military. He was also criticized in Odessa by a Ukrainian lawmaker, right? Mariana Bezhula, who I can try to find her statement here. We're going to take a look in a second about the actual message by the Azov Brigade commander. We're going to break down just exactly what his criticisms are. And again, I can't find a statement here by her. Let's see. Again, I would love to see what her criticisms were of Sadol, but we're going to see if we can find it. There's, again, another criticism here. Here's one covered by visitukraine.org. Okay. Right, the military, interesting. Shortly after Sadol's appointment, the military criticized him. Some of the military said Sadol was a butcher and not treated well by the troops, to put it mildly. Some military telegram channels called him a butcher, blamed him for the heavy losses of the Ukrainian army in Kherson, right? Here she go. Here's her statement. MP Mariana Bezhula accused the commander of the joint force of breaking through Russian troops near Toretsk. Another crime committed by the head of the Eastern Front, General Sadol, is a breakthrough to Toretsk. We now have lost positions that we have held since 2014. Intelligence warned us about this. The day before the possible breakthrough, Sadol withdraws his brigade and deploys a unit that has already suffered losses and has reduced combat capability. Events develop in such a way that there are no prepared fortifications near the road, again, near the fighting in Shumy. Very interesting, and an interesting criticism. Again, this is more broad, I would say, than just heavy losses. This is about setting up soldiers for failure, right? By putting weak weak units into these kind of locations. And let's see if we can zoom in here where the Tourette's she's talking about is. Looks like it is right here near Shumi. So we could see what she's talking about over the last several days, where, again, this is south of Chasiv Yar, where he claims that, again, Ukrainian units were rotated out and left vulnerable to this Russian breakthrough near Shumi. Again, is this a huge, stunning breakthrough? No. But again, the fact that this happened by accident, again, I've been operating on the assumption that these kind of defense in depths are part of a plan. But the fact is that even Ukrainians are saying this isn't the plan, guys. This was just a command failure. A commander who's not up to par. Now, if you're interested in seeing some of the footage of this fighting, I can't show you on YouTube. YouTube's terms of service won't let me. So I take all the combat footage analysis and we review it on combatvetnews.com twice a week, including today. We're dropping footage. So we might try to get some footage of this fighting if we can. And we do that to give ourselves the insight that we need to understand the tactics, the units, the locations of the fighting that's taking place. Oftentimes, the footage is less than 24 hours old. So if you want to support the channel, then you want to become a member. Any one of these tiers will get you access. But if you become a lieutenant or colonel tier, right, in the next week or two, we're rolling out updated benefits. So the lieutenant and colonel tiers are going to get more benefits than just the shout outs at the end of videos. So definitely want to get in on the ground floor of that. Check it out. Links in the description. Okay. Here is the statement, translated, of course, from the Azov Brigade commander. And it's a little tough to follow because it's translated via Google Translate, but he talks about how he's quite a sentimental person and empathetic. He always tries to talk out his problems. Even if he disagrees with somebody, he's a big fan of finding the middle ground and the lesser evil, right? But then he says, sometimes people are just shitty, right? And sometimes you try to say the right thing and to the right people internally, and it just goes to shit, right? You just don't care anymore. And he also references that some people, I think he means General Sadol, completely forgot about their own people and troops when communicating with the Americans and other Western partners. So I suspect the Americans are saying, we want you to do this or that. And he says, yes, we can, ignoring the fact that he doesn't have the manpower to do it, right? He probably, again, this is hard because it's like a yes man. This is really common among military officers, honestly, to sit there. Nobody wants to be a military officer that uses the word I can't. And so what you get is this delusional officers or careerists who say always, yes, I can. And they'll either do it, but incur unacceptable, in this case, losses, but sometimes just unacceptable sacrifices. For example, a commander will say, I want you to have a barbecue. And they'll go, okay, great. We're going to throw a barbecue for the whole unit. And they say, okay, well, we don't have the budget, but we can pull the budget out of the maintenance budget. So now we can buy burgers with stuff that was supposed to go to batteries for our Humvees. And they'll say, okay, well, we don't have the personnel. And some of our units were in the field, but we can rotate them out of the field and do less training, so it's well attended. And oh yeah, we don't really have the planning staff, but we can take people with other jobs and we can just have them do the planning on nights and weekends. We can just overwork them. And so that is kind of the toxic military leadership where pleasing your superiors is more important than any other possible consideration. But you have to remember that if you're an officer, your duty is to speak truth to the commander, right? As much as it is to execute the mission. So sometimes I received orders where I said, listen, I don't think here is what it would take to execute that order that you're giving me. Okay. All right. They said, well, why don't you have vehicles to ride? This was in Afghanistan. They're like, why are your vehicles always down? And I said, I can get them up. I need to cannibalize my other platoon's parts. Or you need to find me these 15 parts. If I can get them, my vehicles will be up in 24 hours. And that's the sort of back and forth conversation of like, listen, it's not hard, but here are the consequences of executing this task. And then, again, a good officer says, in my view, we should not do this. In my view, We should not cannibalize other platoons' vehicles. We should ride the vehicles we have, because doing so, right? We had some vehicles we could have rolled, like they had four wheels and would roll, but they like didn't have air conditioning. So our soldiers would get, like heat stroke. We'd actually have to stop every like 15 minutes and rotate them out. Right. So like my duty to my commander was to say, we could roll in this vehicle, but it would involve making substantial tactical compromises, rendering us unable to be effective fighting forces. It would put the soldiers in the vehicle in extreme danger. And so I was out there and I'm like, that's what you have to do as an officer. You have to. And if he said, you will roll this vehicle, guess what? We'd say, okay, bring water. Here's the mitigations. Here's how we're going to do our best to execute the commander's intent. And that's why officers earn the bucks, because they have to blend truth, reality, possible against the mission, which you need to get done. You need to be an executor. And the analogy is like if you're a marathon runner, you're at the last 5 miles and you're hurting. But there's a difference. Only you know if you're running and you're hurting because your lungs are burning and your heart's pumping hard and you can do it, or you're hurting because your ankle's broken. And if you keep running, you're going to just cripple yourself. Nobody can tell you that. Only you can do that for yourself. So you have to do that for your commander to say, yo, this is a broken ankle. Like we're not going to push through it. We're not going to be our best selves. Like we have to change our plans. And I'm just tired and sore. So I say this because this sounds like an officer who believes he never has a broken ankle. There are always enough people. There's always the ability to get things done. Right? And the commander acknowledges himself. If I was interested in personal benefit, I'd be silent because it's not affecting me at the moment. And frankly, officers sometimes that speak a little too much truth to power oftentimes are sidelined. They have their careers hurt because who do commanders like best? Commanders like best an officer who never complains, who always says, I've got it. Don't worry about me, sir. I'll do this mission no matter how insane it is. And commanders love those officers, but ultimately, in the short term, they make the command look good. But in the long term, the command loses out. Right? And as he says, it affects Ukraine's victory in the war. And he's saying, listen, I'm going to speak up only for myself, which is another thing that when you speak truth to power, you say, listen, this is only me. I'm only speaking on my own behalf. No one under me, none of my other officers, no one else in the Azov Brigade. I'm only talking myself. When somebody, by the way, says this is only me talking, you know they're about to light themselves on fire. Right? When they explicitly are like, I do not speak for anyone else but myself, they're about to douse themselves in gasoline and light it on fire. And that's what he does. I literally called the FBI to investigate this general who, quote, killed more Ukrainian soldiers than any Russian. And he says, I don't care if they investigate me and I don't care if they put me in jail, which is crazy. Right? He also probably knows that Ukraine is desperate for experienced officers. And literally, like, if they put him in jail, they're literally recruiting from jails. Like, nonviolent criminals can get out of jail. So he probably will. He would go back to his position. Right? Again, this is another classic line. Brigade commanders are judged for the loss of an observation post, but a general's not judged for the loss of whole regions and dozens of cities and thousands of soldiers. Right? The conditions of which the brigades are currently fighting is unreal heroism for soldiers, platoon commanders, companies, battalions, and brigades. Their heroism lies in the fact that they restrain the enemy, not thanks to, but in spite of. Yikes. Also, I want to point this out. That line is iconic from the Afghan War. Tom Ricks, a Pulitzer Prize winning author, who was famously critical of the Iraq War's generals, who said, quote, a private who loses a rifle receives a harsher punishment than a general who loses a war. And this is true. The U.S. military has promoted yes men because, again, as we talked about, the U.S. military culture favors people who execute without complaint. The problem is that you cannot run a war by yes men. It means you lose the ability to see the world around you as a commander, right? For example, let's say my maintenance officer told me all your vehicles are good to roll. Green across the board, baby. You go, great. Mount up. We're going to attack the enemy. Well, if that officer's a yes man and those green across the board vehicles are more hypothetical, let's say 50% of those vehicles are down. This is real stuff that happens, by the way. I've been on so many maintenance meetings where I was the problem unit because I honestly reported my vehicles. And I was like, I see you guys. You have all these trucks in the shop and you aren't acknowledging them. Therefore, the brigade goes, wow, we don't spend any money on maintenance. And it's like, yeah, you should. So the number of times you see these officers, right? You see how like your maintenance budget gets dictated by the rate at which your vehicles attrit. And then the commander says, well, I need to plan operations around my ability to roll. And when you don't have that, now whole commands are making the wrong decision. They're blind, right? Because they don't see reality. They see a fantasy. It's like somebody puts up it's like somebody's playing it's like somebody has a TV showing footage of your backyard instead of a window showing you your actual backyard. It's fine. It feels nice until you have to go outside and you walk out in shorts and a t-shirt and suddenly you realize, wow, it's a snowstorm, because I never saw reality. I saw the fantasy that someone wanted me to believe. And that's a danger, by the way. This is just a danger in how hierarchies work. The US government does the same thing in almost every organization, right? Nobody wants to be the problem child, and everybody, but also you have to see reality. You have to operate in reality. So again, as he says in the final part of his message, sometimes the world sends us scumbags to bring us together. That's a good one. I like that. I'm going to steal that, right? 99% of the military hate this guy for what he does. He initiates investigations against commanders who advance and do not lose ground, but then he does not initiate investigations against himself, right? He says, my Rubicon's been crossed, and that the military, again, has to do this. Fate favors the brave. This isn't a personal vendetta. This is a personal decision, though, and I fully accept the consequences. Guys, sometimes it's hard to explain. Sometimes, like, direct combat with the enemy is harder than telling your own boss they're fucking up. In the military, I swear to God, like, in terms of the scariest experiences, knowing that I was going to get absolutely sandblasted by my battalion commander for saying something that was true was not as scary as being like actively shot at, but it provoked a comparably paralyzing level of nervousness. Like it different feelings, right? But you know, it's like what's worse, breaking up with a girlfriend or getting like having the getting stabbed. You're like, well, they're kind of different, but they can be comparable in pain. And that's what that was like. Like, truly knowing that you could this brigade commander, or battalion commander could just fuck your career, fuck your life. You know, that person has the power of law, by the way. They can literally have you arrested and tried. So, you know, that is why these things take courage, and we got to call out courage when we see it, right? And I think it sounds like he did the right thing. He tried to do it internally. He tried to raise his concerns professionally. He's like, all of this has failed. I'm resorting to this public forum. Anyway, guys, that's all I had. Thank you to the Colonel tier members. Thank you to our Lieutenant tier members. I really appreciate you guys. I hope you got some value out of this, and I will see you guys over on combatvetnews.com. Cheers.